Okay then. We're nearing the end of the retreat. We're in the home stretch now. I know from my interactions that all of you have been learning very, very deep insights about your mind. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Today we are going to get to the very heart of the Buddha's teachings. We've been tracing the journey of attention, the journey of mind from one moment to another. Now let's see how all of this comes together, how that creates that experience of that moment as well as affects the experience of future moments of our lives. Let me share my screen and we'll start discussing this. Day 7, the wisdom stack. So I'm going to start with a quote by one of Buddha's two foremost students. So they were Sariputta and Moggala. Now this has been said by the Blessed One. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. This is mentioned in the Majjhima Nikaya or the middle length discourses of the Buddha in the Sutta number 28. I just want to make one comment on the word Dhamma here, which corresponds to the Hindi or Sanskrit word Dhan. Dhamma or Dhan does not mean religion as colloquially many of us take it to mean in Hindi or Sanskrit. And especially in the Buddhist context, it has three connotations. So the first is the teaching that the Buddha has given. We pay homage to the teaching when we take the morning refuges, when we say we take refuge in the Dhamma or Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. We are not converting or we are not swearing allegiance to a religion. Instead, we are taking refuge or accepting with an open mind the teaching of the Buddha. Another connotation is mental phenomena, right? So things that we experience. And the final connotation is the way these mental phenomena occur. Just like we have the laws of physics or laws of any other field, right? So Dhamma refers to the way mental phenomena occur, not just their occurrence, not just the fact that they exist, but how do they manifest within our mind, within our experience. This is what we are talking about over here, especially so the law of mental experience or human experience or the structure or the mechanism of human experience is the context here. So the Buddha says, and as reported by Sariputta, one who sees dependent origination sees the mechanism of human experience or the Dhamma, and one who sees the mechanism of human experience sees dependent origination. Alternately, it can be seen as one who sees dependent origination sees the teaching, and one who sees the teaching sees dependent origination. So what is this teaching that seems to have been given such a high pedestal? So the Buddha presented the understanding of dependent origination as an understanding of the mechanism of the mind. We have covered a lot of it in the last week through the example of the person and the pie, right? How a person comes into a situation, they have a certain configuration, certain current system. There is an interaction with the environment and certain behavior ensues after that. The way the Buddha taught dependent origination uses some of the root cause analysis thought process that we saw when he was talking about the Four Noble Truths. In the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha says suffering has its origin or its foundation or its cause in craving. And through the removal of craving, we can bring about the end of suffering. So in dependent origination 2, what you will see is a series of links. And each one is dependent on the previous links to operate. So these are different mechanisms that are happening, and each one depends on the previous mechanism to operate. As we go, you can think of it as something akin to an apartment block. Right? So if you have an apartment, your first floor definitely needs the ground floor to be standing and stable, even if the first or second floor isn't stable, right? And the seventh floor needs all six floors below it to be stable. So at each of these levels, the previous level and all levels below it are prerequisites for this level to operate. So that is how the root cause analysis understanding is reflected in dependent origination. This will get clearer as we go through the different links. The first link is avidya or ignorance. And this, the Buddha says, is the root of all our behaviors that are not necessarily leading us to a state of 10 by 10 happiness. Right? What is avidya? Not understanding how the mind works, not understanding the impersonal nature of processes, not understanding the impermanence of things in the world, and thereby taking things personally, making it always, no matter what happens in the world, making it always about me, mine, myself. Instead of something happened, why is this happening to me? With this as condition, sanskara or sankhara, personalized condition, comes to be. We discuss how sankhara or sanskara is the impressions that we carry from all actions and experiences from our past, our genetic disposition, the context that's in front of us in the current moment. So this conditioning is now completely colored by the fact that all our actions that we have taken in the past, all our experiences, how we have perceived other people's actions, how we have perceived what happens in the world, all of this is colored by making it all about ourselves, thinking about it as me. Even if somebody honked the horn because they were in an emergency, it's about me. Why did this person honk at me? Right? So your conditioning is colored by the ignorance that has preceded. You have information processing ability, which is colored by conditioning. Your experiences define what you're able to discern, what differentiations you're able to make. Can you judge between the tone of people's voices and what do you infer from that? Are you always suspicious of the tone of people? Are you suspicious of the way people look, for instance? So your information processing faculties or abilities are also colored by your conditioning. The next we have a link that we talked about called mentality materiality, or the link between your hardware and software. So this is a two-way link. We talked about how, for instance, a smile can uplift our state of mind. Firstly, how being in the Brahma Viharas can kick our body into a parasympathetic response, a restorative, healing, regenerative state. Next, we have our doorways to the world, our doorways of experience, which are the sense spaces. These are essentially sensors for information. In our example, the corresponding sensor was the nose. The next thing that happens dependent on all these faculties being in place. So keep in mind, for example, with sense spaces, unless there was an ability to process information, sense spaces would not be of no use. Unless there was a link between our software and hardware, sense bases would be of no use. And whatever conditioning we have is coloring the way our sense bases operate. So now we have an event of contact. The smell, our nose, and our information processing ability coming together to create an information event. Bye. Followed by this, we have sensation that comes up. This is pre-conceptual, so it doesn't need to have anything associated with it. When something sharp strikes us, or we step on something sharp, or we touch something very hot, before we understand what it is, we feel an unpleasant sensation, right? So this is Vedana, pre-conceptual. As Vedana kicks in, we also start attaching concepts to the situation. We start identifying what it is that is causing that sensation. So this is the environment interaction. Right? So far, we just walked in and whatever was happening in the environment caused sensations within us. So far, all of this is an impersonal process. The next thing that kicks in is craving or tanha, Krishna in Hindi or Sanskrit. This makes the whole situation personal. I like it, I don't like it, I want it, I don't want it, draws our attention. The stronger the craving, the more likely it is to draw our attention. This is the beginning of taking things personally. This is the beginning of reactive or compulsive behavior. Craving is followed by clinging, or the story of why I like it, why I don't like it, what I feel about it, what is my view, what is my opinion. I like that pie. Should I have it? Should I not have it? Am I full? Am I not full? Do I deserve it or not? Have I had a long day at work? Or what is the last time I had it? What it means to me? Am I feeling low? And maybe I should uplift my mind by having that pie. So all the stories that we attach about the situation. Again, notice that clinging craving would not be happening without the sense basis, without the contact, without the sensation. And without craving, our attention may not go to that particular object of attention, and we may not go into the particular stories. The person was trying to make a presentation for the next day, and they might have continued thinking about it. So clinging is dependent on craving. And after this, we start going into habitual patterns, right? So habitual pattern may be saying, okay, I'm going to go and have it, or just saying, I'm going to restrain myself because my doctor told me. Some patterns that we have of responding to it, maybe feeling frustrated, getting frustrated with that. So those habitual patterns start emerging, and we are about to choose one of those actions or create a new action which is drawn from those habitual actions that we have performed in the past. Dependent on habitual patterns comes the birth of personality and action. So we assume a very specific persona at that moment. We take a very specific action, and this is a reaction. Why is it a reaction? We are not thinking about what is actually useful, what is meaningful, what is constructive for our life, for us, for others around us. Instead, we are simply answering the call of whether I like it or not like it. And this, as we saw yesterday, right? So if we like it, but we don't have it, it can lead to frustration. If we like it and we have it, we might have a different kind of, for example, we may have regret. If the person goes ahead and has it, they might have regret because they've been sternly warned against having the pie. Or they've been trying to build some self-control and they feel like a failure. Or they've forgotten about the presentation and now they're short on time. It could be one of many things, right? So consequences come from that. Whether we like it or not, craving always keeps us uncomfortable. Craving, if you get what craving wants, it will either move on to the next thing, say, I want this. We talked about how craving can be like a slave driving boss. As soon as you get what your craving was driving you towards, it can move on to the next thing. Or it can get frustrated because the feeling that you got when you first had that thing, the feeling that you got when you had the first bite of pie would have changed by the time you got to the end of the pie. And you may feel that it was too big a pie to eat alone and you have overeaten and now you feel bloated, for instance, right? So these consequences, which are based on craving, can lead to your suffering, as we discussed through multiple examples yesterday. And again, look at this. Each link is dependent on the previous link. Without the previous links, these links would not be there. So we talked about how not understanding how the mind works, giving into our habitual responses, reactions, being under the influence of craving, is what makes a day when nothing has gone wrong, a day in which, in a very chaotic and unpredictable world, nothing went wrong, but it's still a 7 by 10 day. I know through the course of this retreat, based on my interaction, that most of you have moved from that baseline of 7 out of 10 to maybe an 8 or a 9. Right? How do you take it to 10? How do you sustain this? For that, we need to understand how this dependent origination works as a reinforcing loop. And we need to break the cycle. So that's the next part that I want to look at. So every time we take actions based on craving, what is happening is it is affecting our conditioning, right? It is an action that is taken without understanding how the mind works. It is an action that is taken while seeing things very personally, taking things personally. And this starts coloring your conditioning, your consciousness, mentality, materiality, sense basis, and so on. So every time we have not just craving, but the entire rest of the floors of this apartment complex with the clinging, habitual patterns, and the reaction that is extremely personal that are being colored by craving and that are informing. We talked about how the mind learns from everything we do, right? So everything we experience as well. And for instance, if you are extremely irritated because somebody turned up late to a meeting or somebody's actions caused you to be late for a meeting, chances are you're teaching your mind that lesson. Chances are you're teaching your mind that this is how we respond in a situation like this. We take it personally, we get irritated, and this loop gets reinforced. So the next time you have a similar sensation, similar situation, you're likely to respond in a similar manner. You're likely to say the same story. And this is very, very evident, especially in very long standing relations, right? So within families, within couples, it seems like there would be one pet set of arguments or accusations that go around on repeat. There is no new information, no new discovery. It is the same set of arguments and accusations that you did this, and what about that time when you did that, and you always treat me like this, and you always say this, right? So what's happening here is every time we take it personally and react, we are teaching our mind this is the best strategy for this moment, right? So if you were to fall down from a bike, your mind might learn, okay, maybe next time, I have to balance myself a little better and get a little better and better. But we don't take it as personal. When it comes to something like an argument, the craving is extremely strong. And what you're teaching the mind is this is how we do things, right? And this loop keeps getting reinforced. So anytime, even on a day when nothing goes wrong, there'll be multiple things that you'll be reacting to, taking personally based on craving, and you will be not just taking actions in that moment that create unpleasant consequences for you and for others, but you'll be training your mind that this is exactly how we respond. So this is a vicious or self-propagating cycle of ignorance and dissatisfaction or suffering. So how do we break the cycle? What is the use of understanding all these things if we can't break out of it? We can't make a difference to our lives. You remember, right in the beginning I mentioned, the Buddha, when asked multiple metaphysical questions about whether the world is eternal, whether it is infinite, about cosmology, etc., what he said, I teach only one thing. That is the end of dissatisfaction, the end of suffering. Okay. So this is what we call the wisdom stack. We saw dependent origination, we saw how we can exist. And again, I would like to mention everybody, unless we are given this kind of an education, or unless we have been extremely lucky in the kind of conditioning that we've had in our lives, rarest of rare conditioning, we are all stuck in these similar loops. The wisdom stack is about breaking out of this cycle and creating a wholesome stack instead. So what happens? Why did the Buddha choose to identify craving as the root of suffering. He could have taken any of these other links, right? So he says that eventually the top floor is suffering. So why don't we just hack away at the lowest floor or the floor after that? Why do we go at a very specific floor called craving, right? So if you look at it, what is already your conditioning, what is already your information processing faculties, your sense bases, is not something you have control over going into a moment. And you don't necessarily have control over the contact and sensation that is going to happen. We can change that, we can modify our environment, but whatever environment you are in at that moment, you are not deciding exactly what the contact will happen, what sensation it will cause, because these are related to the environment, these are related to your conditioning. Once these happen, craving is the first point from which we start taking things personally. So instead of trying to change the entire world, trying to control the world, saying I will have no contact. So maybe going into a dark room and plugging your ears and nose and saying I will have no contact with the world. Instead of that, we actually operate at the point where we actually start taking things personally and acting with ignorance. So what do we do with craving? This is what we've been practicing continuously, and all of you have been seeing the benefits of this in your daily life as well. By training the faculty, the attentional skill of mindfulness, we are able to detect craving come up, or we are able to detect when our mind slips and gets attached to some object with craving in it. And with the help of using the 6 R's, we diffuse the craving in our mind and we bring our attention to a wholesome place, which is the Brahma Viharas. We discuss the Brahma Viharas: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. You started with loving kindness, and as you deepen your practice, you will develop the other Brahma Viharas as well. And we bring our mind to this situation. So, what your question might be: what happens if I am actually at work or in a discussion, right? What you can do is simply bring a mind with one of these Brahma Viharas, with loving kindness, with compassion, with joy, or with equanimity to that situation. To whatever if it is your work, bring it to your work. If it is in a personal interaction with somebody, bring it to that interaction. Right? Instead of craving, instead of saying me, mine, myself, I don't like it, I like it, I want it, I will be happy only if I have it. There is this if-then conditionality with craving. Craving always works like a slave driver, never allows you to be happy, never allows you to be satisfied. Even if you get satisfied with something, it will move its attention to the next thing. If you get that thing, it's going to say it doesn't feel as good as it used to or as we wanted it. Right? This is something we've discussed covered in our discussion yesterday. So we bring our mind to a wholesome place, and instead of I will be happy only if I get this, or if this goes away from me, we already bring our mind to a happy, joyful, uplifted state of mind. We are no longer dependent on the rest of the world cooperating for our happiness. Not only that, we are not only in an uplifted state of mind, each of these Brahma Viharas has generosity associated with them. So we are in an uplifted and generous state of mind where we are likely to take actions that are not only good for ourselves but for others, and reduce the probability of dissatisfaction arising either from our own self or from other people around us based on what we do. Based on the Brahma Viharas, instead of clinging, instead of creating a story that is completely colored by craving, colored by why this always happens to me, why I don't like it, why this is unfair, what we use is intuition or reflection. Right? We will learn to develop our intuition and reflection. One very easy way is, if you have something that is bothering you in your life, before you're sitting, you can ask yourself this question. And at some point in your sitting, you'll get a very slight, in a small voice, you'll get an answer to that. You have to be perceptive, but over time, you can do that. what happens is the answer that you're getting in your practice is not driven by craving. Typically, when we think of a situation, either we are driven by our greed or our aversion or our fear, right? So we say, what will happen, or what should I do about this situation, or should I do this or not? You will likely get an answer that is colored with greed, aversion, doubt, fear. When you are in your sitting, your mind is without craving. It will give you a wholesome answer. Eventually, everything that you know gets compressed into that answer, but without the flavor of craving. So you can practice this different questions. Don't ask very complex questions or a series of questions, 20-part question. So don't make it like opening hour at the 0 hour at the parliament. So just keep it straightforward so you can start practicing your intuition and getting more and more comfortable. Over time, in any situation, you'll start developing the ability to act in a way that is good for you, because the loving kindness, compassion starts with you. Even our practice started with us and extended to other people. So it is not about doing things at the expense of our interest or what we need, right? So it is about doing things in a way that is best for everyone and in a way that maximizes happiness for us in the present moment as well as in the future, right? So the actions that you take based in the Brahma Viharas will ensure better outcome for you in the present as well as the future. Okay, so you use your intuition, use reflection. So if it's a more complicated situation, you can reflect on it again by reducing the craving and applying your mind to it. So it may be a problem at work that you need to solve, and every time your mind may be afraid of whether or not this will put your job at risk, or whether or not it will get the right reaction from other people, or whether or not it will lead to a good appraisal. Instead of that, you can use it to simply reflect with that mind of loving kindness, without fear, without greed, without aversion in your mind. You can use it to reflect on what's happening. Wholesome behaviors instead of just habitual patterns. You'll find that your habitual patterns are good for things like walking, for brushing, for taking a bath, but habitual patterns are not necessarily the most compassionate or most appropriate response to a situation. That's what we want to go towards. We want to go from reactions to response. We want to go from compulsive behavior to conscious behavior. And finally, when that happens, when you have taken an action, irrespective of the outcome, your mind is uplifted. You are comfortable in the awareness that you did not take a short sighted, myopic, self centered view of things, and you did not take an action that was bound to cause suffering for yourself and others. You take joy in that, you take pride in that, right? And changes the base of this edifice, right? So we go from ignorance to wisdom. Our conditioning stops becoming as personalized. You have non-personalized ways of responding to situations, that you start having those conditionings come inside you. The personal conditioning start to evaporate as you keep teaching your mind that I don't need to care about a horn. So the impact will come across this edifice. Your sensation to it, your likelihood of craving to it, your likelihood of clinging to it, your likelihood of reacting to it. All of these start coming down as your conditioning changes. And the same happens with the rest: consciousness, mentality, materiality, sense spaces, contact, sensation. Your sensations, especially, will change very differently. So, the one on the right is what we can call the wisdom stack. We use the 6 R's, our mindfulness, and collectedness with our activity. So, I have written Brahma Viharas here. So, in your practice, it will be collectedness with the Brahma Viharas, staying with the object of meditation, continuing to stay with the object of meditation whenever our mind gets distracted, bringing it back till the mind starts to become stable with the object of meditation. The same thing can be done with any activity that you're involved in. So, 3 skills that we talked about: harmonious practice or 6 R's, mindfulness, and collectedness. These are transferring us from the ignorance stack to the wisdom stack, because it can seem quite challenging. right? So, okay, if we are having craving come up every moment of our life, how do we keep battling with it? So the point is that we don't need to battle with it. Especially when we practice, we are getting an intense training, intense strengthening of our wisdom stack. And that training does not go to waste. That training is carried on to your daily life as every one of you is experiencing. These practices need to be nurtured. So if you stop doing the practice, you will start seeing that your mindfulness comes down, first of all. Your ability to use the sutras comes down because the craving is so high that you need to repeat it multiple times. And you may miss it if your mindfulness is not strong enough, right? Your collectedness comes down because your mind is full of noise from the different craving based reactions that you've given. So your mind keeps chasing after different things. It doesn't, it forgets the ability to stay with an object without seeking more information, being afraid of what might happen, seeking opportunities desperately. So your mind forgets to stay out of that behavior and be in a collected place. We need to continue our practice to be able to transfer from the ignorance stack to the wisdom stack. I'll take a pause for a minute. So when we do our practice, we talked about the jhanas, right? So as we go deeper and deeper in our jhanas, this transference happens very, very strongly. And there is another way in which this entire thing can be accelerated. So this is a topic, very interesting topic. I'm going to talk about it, and I have no qualms talking about it. So whenever it comes to meditation, whenever it comes to spiritual territory, typically the main thing that people talk about is awakening. So awakening is interpreted in many ways. It is terms used like enlightenment, etc. But essentially, what awakening is about, as we saw in the quote right in the beginning, one who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. So the understanding of the teaching that leads to the end of the suffering is through the understanding of dependent origination. So we can make a lot of progress by doing our practice continuously, by being mindful in regular life. What we can also do, what can also happen while we are practicing this, right? And it does happen while we are doing the practice. We can have very interesting and very strong insights. Already a lot of you are having many profound insights. What can happen is you can have extremely strong insights about dependent origination. So I'll get to that, about how that kind of an event happens and what is the path of awakening. So I'll talk about that now. So before we get to that, I want to talk about something called the awakening factors. As you start going deeper in your practice, what you'll find is, definitely when you're practicing, your mind, after it starts to get stable, starts to get deeper, does not run after things with a flavor of greed or aversion as much. That becomes quite reduced. In fact, after the fourth jhana, the sensation of pleasure and pain comes down drastically, and the greed or aversion that you may have for different things starts coming down. So, if you remember, we talked about two pairs of siblings and one central character that lead to us not being able to learn about our mind, right? So these are the five hindrances. We talked about greed and aversion, we talked about restlessness and sloth, and we talked about doubt. So doubt also starts going down. A lot of you have a lot of confidence in the practice already, and this will only get stronger as you continue to practice. From the second jhana, confidence starts becoming strong, doubt starts to go down. You want to continue, you don't want to ask questions, right? So you want to continue with the flow. Restlessness and sloth, on the other hand, continue right till the end, continue till you are like fully awakened. right? So these are your friends for a very, very long time. How do you deal with them? So this is very interesting, right? So restlessness you can think as a counterpart of tranquility, and sloth you can think as or you can think of it as the opposite of tranquility, and sloth you can think of it as the opposite of alertness. Your mind is dull, not really alert to what's happening. What we want is a very tranquil and very alert mind. So think of it as being in a extremely well-equipped lab with minimum visual or auditory noise and having the best, electron microscope to observe something. Chances are that you're going to be able to observe it properly. So there is a very good environment and there is a very good resolution at which you can see things. There is an alertness to see things, right? So these two need to come together for us to be able to see what's happening in our mind very clearly. And what happens is sometimes in your sitting, you'll find restlessness becomes a lot. So if you look at the right of the screen, there are three things you can use to work with restlessness. So the first is equanimity. Understand that distraction coming up is not good or bad, it simply is. It is what's happening in the mind. Understand if you get restlessness, it's okay. Don't need to fight it, because when you start fighting it, you inject more restlessness, more energy into the situation. Nothing is good or bad, it simply is. That's what equanimity, that is the equanimous mindset. Tranquility is akin to the relaxed step. So there may be some tightness, tension related to multiple things that are starting to happen in your mind, and this will lead to restlessness. So we can use the relaxed step to relax the tension in our mind without necessarily needing to use the 6 hours. We use the 6 hours only when our mind wanders completely away. Here we can simply calm the mind down by using the relaxed step. And finally, collectedness, remembering to stay with the object. Right? So what happens is sometimes we forget about the object. We start getting caught in some story. Remembering to use the 6 hours whenever required. Right? Our instructions are always very simple. Stay with the object and use the 6 hours if your mind drifts away. So simply following that instruction, right? Not starting to get too far ahead, not thinking too much, just simply stay with the object. The object may change over time, as has been changing for some of you, but stay with the object. On the other hand, if sloth arises, what do you use? Use joy, use your smile, have a nice large smile if you're starting to feel dull, that your mind is not sharp, that you're feeling maybe a little sleepy. Laugh at your mind for being silly, for getting in your way. Bring some energy, take more interest in your practice, take more interest in your object. If you're sending metta, be really interested in wishing the other person or persons goodwill. And bring curiosity. So this is called the investigation factor or Dhamma Vichar. Right? Curiosity about how the mind works. Try to take an interest in catching your attention before it drifts, a little bit before the next time. So every time it drifts, be curious about catching it a little early. Be curious about seeing what's happening. How exactly is this drift happening? How exactly is something coming to take my attention away? Right? Start having that curiosity. And of course, at the center of all this is mindfulness, your ability to remember to observe mind's attention and its movement. Where is it placed? How is it engaged over there? Whether there is craving or not? What is pulling its attention away? And how does it move from one object to another? When I mentioned this early in the retreat, I'm sure this may have seemed like too much to remember or too complicated. But by now, all of you are familiar. These things happen. Your attention is placed on something. Your attention always has a way of being engaged with that, with craving or without craving. Your attention has other things competing for it, and sometimes they manage to pull it away, right? So all these things we are observing with mindfulness that allows us to understand whether there is restlessness in our mind, understand whether there is sloth. When there is sloth, we won't see this very clearly. When there is restlessness, our attention will be dying to go after one thing or the other. So we work with these awakening factors, okay, and this can be used in daily life as well as during your practice. And I'll talk about how the awakening factors actually work. So as we discussed, we start with metta or loving kindness as our object. This takes us through the first four jhanas, which are known as the Rupa jhana. Here, you start gaining confidence, so doubt gets dulled. Greed and aversion gets dulled as you get into the fourth jhana, and your sensation of pain and pleasure comes down. Then you go to the fifth jhana, which is the first of the Arupa jhanas. This is the base of infinite space. It is accompanied with a feeling of expansion. You go to the base of infinite consciousness, and the feeling of compassion changes into a feeling of joy or rejoicing, which is mudita, and you start getting very, very granular sensations. Then you go to the seventh jhana along with equanimity, an extremely stable feeling, a feeling of extreme confidence, extreme stability. And slowly you can enter something known as the quiet mind, when even the equanimity dries away and you are left with just mind and some movements in the mind as your object of meditation. And as you go beyond this, you will get into the eighth jhana. So eighth jhana, that's all the Brahma Viharas are done with. The eighth jhana, you things are happening in your mind, you're barely perceiving it, but you're not even getting to a point where you're able to put a name to it. This is the most easy to say name, neither perception, nor non-perception. Okay? Don't worry too much about the name. So this is essentially one of the deepest states of mind. Right? So your mind is literally, instead of from where you start in your active life or even before the practice or when in your first sitting, right? You had so many things happening in your mind. In even in the seventh jhana, before we got to the eighth jhana, you can easily sit for 30 minutes or 1 hour without a single thought coming and taking your attention. You'll see the very beginning of thoughts and you'll be able to relax them, then and then. And then you get to the eighth jhana, which is almost a dream-like state. You feel like you're almost asleep, yet your mind is very sharp and alert. Throughout this entire process, we are balancing our awakening factors. When restlessness arises, we use equanimity, collectedness, tranquility to relax them. When sloth arises, we use energy, we use joy, we use curiosity. Right? We are continuously doing this. By the time we get to the eighth jhana, and this is the most common way this happens, that's why I'm talking about the eighth jhana. I'll get back to that in a minute. What we are wanting to do is get a perfect balance of alertness and tranquility. Not too much alertness accompanied with restlessness, not too much tranquility with dullness of mind. So it's almost like if you've ever played one of those games where you have to get all like a number of little ball bearings into the middle of a maze, right? And you need to get everything right to make sure they move right, right? So you need to get that perfect balance of alertness and tranquility. And when that happens, there is a aha moment. What happens is you may go into a little gap in the series of dependent originations that is happening, right? So series of triggers of movements, contact happening, then some kind of craving, clinging, or another contact happening. We have different sense bases, so much information coming at each sense base, right? So a lot of things are happening. Our mind is not even restricted by, the kind of limitation that we have on our the other sense base, right? So many things are happening. By this stage, by the eighth jhana, things have really, really quieted down. Very few things are happening. And what happens is your system can go into a gap between these different phenomena that are happening. So no contact is happening, no consciousness is arising for that contact, right? And we are completely in a mental realm, right? So no mental contact is happening, no mind consciousness is being generated. It's almost like being in a little vacuum for a little while. Can happen for a few seconds, can happen a little longer than that. And suddenly the mind comes back online. And the very next contact that happens, the very next contact, the first contact after that gap, right? You've had a jump start when you start your practice, there is huge number of things going on in your mind and body, and it's coming down, the noise is coming down. And eventually you've come to a point where everything's died out. And then one contact happens and a set of things happen. And your mind has a perfect balance of alertness and tranquility. and your mind sees the process of dependent origination. You may not, it won't come with labels. It won't come with great clarity, oh, this is craving or this thing. But your mind sees it, right? You may not be able to verbalize it, but your mind sees it. You may not be able to verbalize how you learn to balance a bike, how you learn to ride a bike, right? But your mind learns. Through all the effort that you put in your practice, your mind learns to see and understands for the first time. So it is like seeing a magic trick happen, and it's no longer fooling you. See dependent origination for the first time. And this is what is known as awakening. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma, sees the laws that govern human experience, sees the arising of suffering, sees the ending of suffering, understands happiness, understands sustaining happiness, understands the end of suffering. And this can happen multiple times. So there are different levels. So every time this kind of an event happens, there is a first time that it happens, it is like giving up a huge portion of suffering. Right? This is called a stream entry event. And there can be multiple more events that help your understanding get deeper and deeper. The more times you have these events, the more clearly you're able to see the links of dependent origination. And the stronger the understanding becomes, the stronger the intuition becomes, the stronger the ability to sidestep that slippery slope of craving and get into the wisdom stack that becomes stronger and stronger. So a lot of people talk about awakening and things happening. So this is like a very exact map of progression of how awakening happens and what one experiences there. And this can actually happen in any of the jhanas. It doesn't have to happen only in the eighth jhana, but that is much more rare. The eighth jhana is the ability to reach that perfect combination of very little mental, very few mental processes, very alert mind, and very tranquil mind. So the three things that need to come, right? So you need to be able to come to a point where everything stops, and then this is known as cessation or nirodha, right? So if you have heard that word, uh, in yoga, it's called chitta vritti nirodha, right? So you kind of reach a point where all these mental processes stop, and then when it restarts, you see what is the fundamental building block, and it's a very different understanding from the discussions we've had over the week, right? This is not the only way, though, to go from a 7 by 10 to a 10 by 10. So it's not awakening or bust. You are the best witness of that, right? You're already seeing the difference that comes in your life by being more mindful, by being able to use the 6 hours to diffuse craving, by being able to stay with the object either in your meditation or in any task, right? Every time you do that, you're building the wisdom stack, you're nurturing the wisdom stack, you're developing the wisdom stack, right? So it does need practice. And it's simply because we've had a lifetime of bad habits, been feeding and strengthening the ignorance stack continuously. And we need to start going to new habits, right? So our neural pathways are like highways, right? The more you use them, the more investment goes into them, the better they are maintained, the easier they are to travel. So if we've been caught up in certain habitual patterns, certain reactive tendencies, that keeps going on all the time. We have to start traveling slightly different routes, step away from the slippery slope of craving, move towards a wisdom stack, and then you'll find your mind invests, builds, and maintains that highway that leads to rejoicing and happiness instead of suffering. Takes you from that 7 by 10 day to a 10 by 10 day. Just needs that mindfulness, just needs the trusting of the process, application of the process, staying with the process, doing your practice, bringing your mindfulness into regular life, using the 6 hours when needed, staying with the object, using your free time instead of spending it on your phone or other things. Right? Use it to develop your mind, be collected. No matter, even if it's an active situation, if you're not doing something mentally taxing, keep it in a uplifted, wholesome state so that every action that you take is based on that. And the learning that your mind gets is, hey, we can stay like this. We can decouple our happiness from saying, I will be happy, Only if this happens in the way that I want it. Only if the world cooperates to give me what I want will I be happy. And decouple your happiness. So that was a fairly long talk. So that's it for today. I have started getting some of inputs from some of you. So we'll be integrating that. So now everything has started to come together. Tomorrow we'll cover the one last piece, which is the Eightfold Path. That was the solution that the Buddha gave. The Buddha said suffering has its origin in craving, the end of craving, kind of suffering, and the Eightfold Path is the way to get it. So everything we've been practicing is part of the Eightfold Path. I will just lay it out so you can understand it. And the rest of the time we'll use to get into more applications of this in daily life, in regular life, to work with real problems or real challenges or real aspirations that you have in your life. Thank you and have a lovely evening. I'll see you for the group meditation in the morning.